Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Introducing Restorative Teacher Student Mediation. With us today we have Ondine Gross, who is a national certified school psychologist, a licensed therapist, and author of Restore the Respect, How to Mediate School Conflicts and Keep Students Learning. Of course, you should be joining our free community, Teaching All Students. It's sponsored by Brooks Publishing. You'll receive the following benefits. It's free resources, online discussions, our edWebinar recordings, quizzes for CE certificates, and then you can see your edWebinar activity on your homepage. And then to get your CE certificate, you'll be emailed your certificate after 24 hours. If you pre-registered for the edWebinar with your email address, if you logged in today with your email address, and then if you join the session only by phone or are watching this as a recording, you can still take the quiz. You're going to go to the edWebinar archives and select the edWebinar you watched. And then a special offer from Brooks Publishing. You can save 20% on our products with code edWebOG. And now I would like to turn it over to Ondine Gross. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here, and I want to thank the folks at edweb.net and also at Brooks Publishing for this invitation. I would like you to think about if you've ever heard a student say, "My teacher hates me," or "My teacher's racist." When I've presented to groups, I see every hand go up. And I just want you to think for a minute about what that would feel like if you're actually the student who thinks your teacher hates you. If you work in a secondary setting, you've probably also heard things like, "If he doesn't show me respect," talking about the teacher, "why should I show him respect?" Or, "She sent me out, but other people were talking." Now I want you to think about if you ever heard a teacher if you ever heard a teacher say about their students, "She refuses to do any work, she doesn't care, he doesn't show any effort." Or maybe talking about a student who withdrawn and comes to class and puts their head down, or is highly distracted and always on their phone, or maybe doesn't show up at all or comes late. But all of us have heard teachers say, "I'm all out of ideas." And imagine what that feels like from the perspective of a teacher when their whole job is to connect with students and be effective in educating them. And then, kind of witnessing what happens when things get off track. Like we've all seen when a student really loses it with a teacher and maybe curses or gets suspended. But then maybe a few hours or days later, after the disciplinary consequences taken hold, they just kind of return to class as though nothing happened. And there isn't any type of opportunity to process that with the teacher. And then, through no fault of their own, teachers use the discipline that's available to them, which is maybe writing a note, sending the student to the office. And basically, with the same students and the same teachers or the same problems, things just cycle and nothing ever changes. Well, I saw a lot of that too. I've been a school psychologist for 31 years, and most recently at Centennial High School in Champaign, Illinois for the last 24 years. I really love being a school psychologist, but kind of halfway, well, not even halfway, I'd say about 80% through my career, I decided to go back to school thinking like, I'll go to a university, I'll get a master's degree in administration and maybe learn about all this from a different perspective. So that's what I did. And I also wanted to give back to my community because my daughters had gone off to college. So kind of as an empty nester, I wanted to learn how to be a mediator, to be a community mediator. So I learned a really simple technique. So both the education and the mediation lessons kind of percolated. So I could think about how could I use my skills to help. But quick story, when I started at the University of Illinois on the very first day, and I was by far the oldest student in the class, I raised my hand and said, "Will we be learning about best practices?" And this professor gave me this withering look, and she said, "There's no such thing as best practices. Best practices for whom? Who wins, who loses? who's the beneficiary? Who isn't? She said, best practices are really going to be based on the institution that helps create them to make sure they're inclusive, that everyone benefits, and that no one's left out. So it's like, okay, I get it. So a little bit about my school, which is, when you hear about the school, it's not to just go on and on about this school, but to really think about this as possible in any town USA. I mean, Centennial High School is in the Midwest. It's got a population of about 1,400 plus students. And the school, like many across the country, went through big shifts in demographics. Over a period of years, we shifted in our numbers of students on low socioeconomic status. Our racial demographics changed. The numbers of students who met and exceeded standards in reading and math changed. And we also had a ton of turnover of administrative leadership. As a matter of fact, the school, like many in the country, did not meet adequate yearly progress during days of No Child Left Behind. So the school even underwent restructuring and had big changes of staff and so forth. So a new administrative team came in 2010, and they kind of walked into a mess. Lots of ODR, stands for Office Discipline Referrals, high suspension rates, low morale, a lot of faculty and staff frustration, disproportional representation of who was getting discipline, meaning that it was falling heavily on the backs of African American students in that system, and also just a lot of reacting rather than using proactive approaches. It so happened that I was in the building on the summer of 2011 because I needed to clock administrative internship hours for my master's degree. And I came upon two assistant principals at a whiteboard, and they were kind of plotting what would it look like to kind of introduce tiered systems of support at Centennial. So MTSS stands for multi-tiered systems of support. We've heard of PBIS, which stands for Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, or RTI, which stands for Response to Intervention. But the whole idea was, let's be thinking about how to really build our systems of support for students. So as I was walking by, I said, hey, can we try something new? I'd really like to see what would happen if we tried mediation between teachers and students. And they said, okay, and put it on the board. And that was about a 4-minute conversation. So in the fall, when the teachers came back, on the first day, they were introduced to what these systems of supports would look like. And this was what the slide looked like exactly. Okay, the school psychologist is going to try some teacher-student mediation. I'm going to try to eliminate some problems. The idea is that if the same teacher has disciplined the same student with a discipline referral 3 times, we will invite that teacher and student to participate in a mediation, or if the student or the teacher just requests it. The determining response, meaning we would know if a mediation is successful, is if after the mediation, there were no more discipline referrals from that teacher to that student. Now, I fully expected that people would flood the principal's office complaining, like, what is this now? Because I thought, okay, teacher resistance, this is something new. This is kind of possibly threatening to teachers, kind of suggesting that this is a level playing field. Maybe they won't like it. Maybe they'll see it as disrespectful. But to my surprise, nobody complained. So far, so good. So around that time, there was this idea being bandied about, like, try some action research, try something. And so this is kind of the spirit with which teacher-student mediation was introduced. It's by no means a perfect solution. It's by no means the end-all be-all. As with all things human, it is imperfect. But we soon found out that it was quick, easy, awesome, and rewarding. And it was like, oh my gosh, why haven't we been doing this whole time? And I was so excited that that's really what brought me here today to share it with you. So my goals for this webinar are to really promote the practice of restorative teacher-student mediation in really any school setting, K through 12, and show how they're conducted. And also highlight how mediation boosts racial and cultural understanding between teachers and students and improves overall school climate. I will share some data with you on what it looked like to roll this out over a 3-year period within a multi-tiered system of supports, but also to suggest that you can use mediation as a standalone intervention. And lastly, to discuss in frank terms what the feedback was like, both from teachers, students, some challenges, and some next steps. So thanks again for being here. So today's edWebinar derives from the book I wrote about this topic. And in the book is a pretty comprehensive bunch of information, but also about how to mediate between students and between adults in schools, which I think there's a real need for. I don't have time to go into all that today, but just wanted you to know it's there. So despite what my professor said, I really believe there are best practices in terms of how students are treated in school. You know, a lot of people have researched what does go in an ideal, what occurs in an ideal classroom. And in an ideal classroom, students and teachers are treated with sensitivity and civility. Students are valued as individuals and encouraged to participate without fear of put-downs from the teacher or other students. Conflict is managed effectively. If something comes up, teachers and students have a way to communicate and problem solve. But when classrooms are less than ideal, we know that Black males and students with disabilities are the most heavily impacted by discipline policies that remove them from the classroom. And I found a pretty current article that said that differences in how teachers discipline Black and white students contribute to racial disparities and spur repeated student misbehavior among Black students. And there's a great big cost to this. According to a 2014 study by the US Department of Education, not only are significant numbers of students suspended and expelled, even for minor infractions of school rules, but lower education rates impact society in all kinds of ways. We'll have ultimately higher rates of unemployment and crime and lower rates of overall health. And so the thought occurs to me, and has occurred to me throughout my career, that, okay, millions of dollars are poured into education, billions of dollars really, in all kinds of teaching strategies, teaching trends, technology. But it seemed like we've just been ignoring the most basic fact, which is that schools are social institutions. And the quality of any social institution is going to be based on the quality of the relationships between the people. It's relationships that matter. And every bit of research shows that children learn best when their teachers care about them. And really that can be extended to any adult in the building. All adults perform best when we believe we're cared for. And so we also know that teachers and students want improved relationships, but I know that the traditional structure of many schools doesn't allow the time and the place or even help people develop the skills to develop the needed trust and rapport in their relationships. So what ends up happening is kind of what a wonderful author named Adichie talked about in a great TED Talk, which I encourage you to look at, called The Danger of a Single Story. And basically the single story is the stereotype, and this happens in schools all the time because we start to flatten our understanding of each other into this one-dimensional idea, like the unfair teacher, the racist teacher, the student who doesn't care, and this replaces true understanding. Also, there's a big call to action across the country, and what you see in front of you is from a Senate bill here in Illinois called Senate Bill 100. But across the country, people are saying, please, you educators, you social workers, you psychologists, you counselors, you administrators, you've got to work smarter. We've got to stop removing kids from the classroom. We've got to break the school to prison pipeline. We have to come up with effective, culturally responsive strategies that really promote health and caring school climates, nurturing. And so here's the good news. Mediation helps all of these things. And mediation really boosts that understanding, fosters trust and empathy, and it falls right under the social emotional learning things that we're trying to do with kids. Also, mediation breaks negative cycles and enhances student achievement and can really promote a more positive overall school climate. But the thing I love most about it is that it's individualized. And it's, at the end of the day, it's about this teacher and this student. What do they need? And the best people to work on that relationship is the two people that are in it. So that individualization it just makes so much sense. And I learned that, I had my boilerplate of ideas of how to consult and how to counsel and, oh, have you tried this? Have you tried that? But I was really humbled when I started doing these meetings because the teacher and student came up with so many wonderful strategies themselves that were unique to their environment and their relationship. And lastly, mediation is easy, awesome, and free. You don't have to buy anything. So just as a quick review, true story, when this new principal came in, he kept saying over and over, this school doesn't have any systems. This school lacks systems. And frankly, I was kind of offended. It's like, doesn't he realize we're working our tails off here? I didn't even know what he was talking about. But I did come to understand that he really meant, okay, tiered systems of support, and that really it was about organizing the adults in the building to be more systematic. Talk about prevention, make sure students know what's expected of them, identify the needs at your building, and then who and what are your resources in that building, meet regularly, talk about it, which is the collaboration piece, and then collect some data, analyze the data, and tweak things as you go based on the outcomes of what you're seeing. Makes sense. And just as a reminder, sometimes when people hear about teacher-student mediation, they say, well, is this designed to replace discipline and replace consequences? And the answer is not necessarily, because, discipline and consequences work just fine for most kids. I mean, most kids at the tier 1 level respond to a call home or a visit to the office or a talking to by an authority figure, and they don't repeat the same mistakes. But we all know that there's kids who do have repeated concerns and misbehavior and need more. They need more nurturance. They need more care for a lot of reasons, from, having trauma in their background to maybe some disadvantages to any number of things, because each person is so unique. So we know the kids at the tier 2 and tier 3 level need more relationship building, nurturing, social skill building, and so forth. So that's kind of a way to think about where mediation fits in. And for those of you interested in how we collected data, this is a sample of a tracking tool that we use from Swiss SWIS software. It allowed us to kind of list the different things we were trying. If you look carefully, you can see teacher-student mediation was at the end. We were tracking how many students participated and what the outcomes were in terms of who was not having any more discipline referrals following the mediation. The strength in any system is the fidelity with which you implement it. So, you meet regularly, you show up on time. It really helps when leaders are very hands-on. You use the strengths of the people and the resources you have. You look at the data, you tweak as needed. The other thing I really swear by, which I didn't make a slide for, is meetings norms. And that is that the people who are going to meet regularly kind of decide how they're going to do that. So my favorite meeting norm is, and I'll read it to you, we will keep our discussions positive and focus on suggestions for improvement. That one norm, along with a few others like showing up on time, stay off your cell phone, and things like that. I'm being a little bit facetious. But if you have some norms and you stick to them, it really does frame the meeting. We would meet on every 2 weeks to have these tier 2 meetings where we would do this. The school had a late start day that was for staff meetings, and that's when we did it. I know whenever I hear talks from anybody in schools, I always want to know when and how, where'd you fit it in? So I'll tell you that information as we go. So, introduction to teacher-student mediation. So the concept of mediation is like over 3,000 years old, and it's existed across cultures. And it basically has to do with somebody in the role of a middle carrier mediator who is an impartial, neutral party helping people resolve a difficulty. Now, conflict can be helpful. Conflict makes things kind of rise to the surface and gets things out in the open. But unresolved conflict, especially in schools, really saps the energy, the self-esteem, and the efficacy of all parties. And it can also be rooted in class, cultural, or racial bias and misunderstanding. Why mediate with teachers and students? Well, I'll tell you right now, one conflict can derail an entire semester. One little problem can snowball. It can just really have a huge impact. So, of course, mediation aims to improve that relationship, to boost respect understanding, and also just the individual effectiveness of each party. But also, the real gift of mediation is that it's really therapeutic for people to tell their full stories and be heard and affirmed. It is healing, it is calming, it is just the highest show of respect. And the ultimate result and the goal is to increase academic achievement and decrease disciplinary actions. Here's what teacher-student mediation is. It's a highly structured 50-minute meeting led by a mediator. It's a safe space and time away from the class for the teacher and student to expand their understanding of each other's perspective and develop their trust and rapport. I played around a little bit with shortening it or lengthening it, but I really found that 50 minutes was a good amount of time for this meeting to really let people tell their full stories in an unhurried way. And of course, teacher-student mediation is really designed to model for the students appropriate social communication and problem-solving behaviors. Here's what teacher-student mediation is not. And it's not a meeting where you just sort of get everyone in the room to tell their story or tell their sides or what really happened or who's telling the truth. The information is helpful, but what mediation is, the way I'm showing you today, is really structured. So it's not just loosey-goosey and like, okay, whose turn is it to talk kind of thing. It's also not to identify a perpetrator and victim and meet in order for the perpetrator to say sorry. Apologies are offered often in mediations, but they're spontaneous and they're not required. The other thing that's different in mediation, instead of just getting people in a room to talk, I mentioned the structure, but also the mediator really sets the tone and the pacing. The mediation is in charge, and I know this little picture is a little bit facetious, but the idea is the mediator is really helping frame the conversation so people fully hear each other and also to get clarification on things and to keep the meeting positive. There's 4 principles of mediation, and I didn't make these up. These are practiced widely, and I'll go over them. So impartiality is that mediators don't take sides. We're there to listen, not to solve problems or evaluate solutions or provide options. And we're really there to make sure the communication is evened out so that each party experiences that they have equal rights for dignity and understanding. Confidentiality. Knowing the meeting is confidential gives people confidence in the process. Now, I know that in schools, there might be, especially with younger kids, there might be parents or administrators who want to know, like, hey, how'd it go? What happened? That's really going to be based on the people who participate because it's their meeting. When I say confidentiality, what I mean is that the mediator is not going to go and divulge the contents of that meeting without people's permission. So really, it's the people who participate are the ones that are in charge of the confidentiality. Voluntariness, highly, highly important. Nobody, I repeat, nobody must go to mediation who doesn't want to be there. It is completely voluntarily. You come voluntarily, you stay voluntarily. And it's a great rule because when you think about it, if people come to this meeting, it means that they're open. They're open to listening to each other. They're open to developing some new ideas. So it really almost solves the problem. And also, students are really touched when they see that their teachers took time to be in this meeting. It really means a lot to them. Lastly, the concept of self-determination, the principle of self-determination. And that basically means that what people choose to talk about is up to them. And this is their meeting, and this empowerment helps them to feel more effective. So now I'm going to go into how to conduct a teacher-student mediation. You're going to see some italics, and that's dialogue, and I will be the mediator, and I'll use that dialogue as though I'm speaking in a meeting. First step before you even start, though, is to make sure that it's voluntary. Now, in a secondary school, it's easily arranged. I would just, shoot an email out. Hey, I've been asked to do a mediation with you. Is this okay? You always want to ask permission. And if so, what's a good time? Now, notice I'm not doing a big debriefing with that teacher ahead of time because I honestly don't want to know the backstory because I want to be impartial in the meeting, and kids can really pick up if they think adults are in cahoots. So the best thing is for the mediator to really try to wear that mediator hat and be impartial and not know a lot of background, because as it unfolds in real time, it'll be more meaningful. Also ask the student, because this is where that respect starts. And just explain it and ask if they're okay with it, maybe go over the timing and so forth. Imagine how it feels to a student to be shown that much respect, to be given that option. They really take note of that. The mediation process. So here's what actually happens. This is kind of a long list, and I'll give you a second to look it over, but we'll be going through these steps one by one. So first thing, welcome to this mediation. Have a seat. I'm so glad you are both here. I am a big fan of mediation because I think it's a great way to resolve conflicts, clear the air, allow people to move forward. And it's also a great way to learn things about another person's perspective. The way mediation works is really simple. I will ask you both the same question. What brought us here today? I ask that you speak only to me and not to each other. While each person speaks, I will take notes and ask clarifying questions. While one person is talking, the other person could just sit back, relax, and listen. It's amazing how much information is picked up this way because people learn things they didn't know before. Once each of you has spoken to me, I will summarize what you've said. I will then ask you to speak to each other and develop your plan to move forward. The rules to mediation are that only one person speaks at a time, and there are no interruptions or put downs. And there are 4 principles of mediation. 1 is your mediator, I'm impartial, which means I don't take sides. 2, this meeting is confidential. 3, everyone is here voluntarily. And 4, the last principle is called self-determination. That means what we do and do not talk about is up to each of you. Is that okay with all of you? And I know that maybe for younger children, this wording can be changed accordingly, but these are the 4 principles. So who would like to go first and tell me what brought us here today? Now, notice I'm not saying, tell your side or give your version, because I don't want to set up like the conflict dyad mode. Here's my little prop here. I have this piece of paper with a line down the center. I'm taking notes on what the teacher and student are telling me and I'm writing down their words, not my words. I'm not interpreting, I'm reflecting. And that's really key to use their words because that shows that you heard them. It sometimes happens that people start turning to each other and start talking directly. And even though that might seem like a good idea or efficient, don't let it happen. Have each person speak only to you. It's critically important because it allows you as a mediator to set the tone and also to prevent the 2 people from going sort of into their back and forth conflict mode. And even if they're not in a conflict, it's just not time yet for that. Because the reason is the participants speak in a different voice when they're speaking to you as a mediator, both the child and the teacher. So if people start talking to each other, I might just raise my hand and say, oh, just want to remind you at this time you're speaking only to me. Now, when people are talking, you're using reflective, non-judgmental listening skills to validate the person's point of view. I go into and review in the book what that looks like, those listening skills. But the non-judgmental part is so important. You have a respectful tone of voice. Oh, so you feel like the teacher's picking on you when you're not the only person talking. I want to make sure I understand this. I see this can be difficult. I appreciate that you're talking about it. You're saying that you've tried many times to ask Johnny to stop speaking, including taking him into the hall for a talk, and it didn't help for very long. Notice that I'm using tone in my voice because just because I'm an impartial mediator doesn't mean that I have to be wooden. I'm going to have a lot of inflection because I'm invested in the success of these 2 people's relationship, and I show that care as a mediator. You pause to summarize at various times, and that helps to modulate the rhythm of the mediation, because sometimes when people are emotional, they might speak too fast or too long, and it's okay to just raise your hand and say, oh, can I just pause here just for a second? I want to make sure I understand. It seems like what you've been saying, and then, offer a little summary. Thanks and praise, thanks and praise, thanks and praise. There is no such thing as too much thanks and praise in a mediation. It is extremely powerful in setting a positive tone and climate in that meeting. And it relaxes people. It helps people feel like they're on the right track. It creates a positive sort of overall just feeling in the meeting. And you say something like, by the way, I just want to thank you both again for being here. It takes courage to be in a meeting like this. And it really matters that you're both here to show that effort toward a better solution. And also, thanks and praise is good to throw in when you don't know what else to say, or maybe it's an awkward moment, and it just really is powerful in setting a good tone. So once a mediation gets started, it's kind of like there's a lot of details that really matter. And sometimes there's like one thing that got things off track. So you do want to kind of identify details. And just because you're an impartial mediator doesn't mean you can't ask questions. Find out when the class meets or what the subject was, or is it a big class? Is it a small class? Is it right before lunch? Is it at the end of the day? Sometimes these things matter, and these kinds of pieces of information help the story along, to see if there's been changes in the environment even, or things that were going on sort of as the backstory. Sounds like things were going well for a while. What happened that changed things? Oh, so you had been absent and were talking because you were trying to figure out what was going on. Providing the teacher and student with an opportunity to identify feelings. This is powerful because we don't always get a chance to talk about feelings, and students often have no clue about how teachers feel. They don't know, and they don't think about necessarily the amount of preparation a teacher went into to prepare for a lesson, or their investment of their feelings. They don't know how it feels when students aren't engaged in the class, and they certainly don't know how maybe this teacher feels when they're not performing up to par. So giving a teacher to talk about what that feels like is really powerful and a real learning experience for the student. And by the same token, asking the student how things feel is really helpful for the teacher, because sometimes they don't know that things they do might be impacting students in various ways. And this whole time, you're writing down what they're saying in those verbatim quotes in your notes. Mining for gold is a term I came up with because I quickly found out that one of the most game-changing moments in the whole mediation was when they heard something nice about the other. So I started to elicit positive statements or highlight them when they were said spontaneously. Oh, wait a minute, you said that you've seen good work from Randall, tell me more. Or, what do you like about the way Miss Young teaches? Or, tell me about a time when things were better. Quick story, a teacher that I was in a mediation with heard a student, I'll tell you, I said to this student, tell me something you like about Miss Jones. He said, oh, Miss Jones, that's easy, she cares. Well, later, Miss Jones told me that those two words meant so much to her that she put them on a Post-it note and put it in her office, because she said, Ondine, those two words are going to get me through the year. We know teachers care, but they don't always know that their students know that, or they don't get that positive feedback very often from students. So it's really a lovely, lovely moment when these things come out. And it also dispels the notion of mutual dislike. Here's another thing you want to jump all over when it happens: when people take responsibility for their actions. When you think about it in life, this is a very sophisticated social skill, to be able to own it when you did something wrong, to be able to say, you know what, I could have handled that better. You know what, I kind of regret that I, didn't do X instead of Y. So when someone spontaneously takes responsibility for their actions in a mediation, you want to really acknowledge that. Wow, that's really big of you to take responsibility for your rude behavior that day. Thank you for your honesty. Or, that's really nice of you to apologize. Mediations don't require anyone to apologize. So when people say they're sorry, it is truly appreciated. Now, remember that the way the mediation is structured, that each person is talking only to the mediator at first, and you've been using your reflective listening, you've been taking notes, you've been kind of pausing and summarizing, using your mining for gold, acknowledging, when they take responsibility and so forth, and also kind of framing the arc of what happened. But at the end of each person's full statement, you want to make sure to say, is there anything else you would like to say before we move on? And 9 times out of 10, there is something more they'd like to say. So never assume they're done talking, always ask. Then when both parties have said their parts to you as a mediator, you're going to provide an overall humanizing but impartial summary that kind of recaps what happened and kind of how people felt about it. You're going to use your notes. So again, people don't feel like you're misinterpreting the statements they made. You're going to use their words, but also you're going to really reemphasize the positive statements and the goodwill that's been expressed. You're going to use a lot of thanks and praise in your summary. This has been really helpful because we learned so much we didn't know before. Thank you both again for being here today. It takes courage to be in a meeting like this, and you showed real effort toward improving things. Effort matters. At this point in the mediation, I'm going to ask you to speak to each other and develop your plans to move forward. Now, at this point, the mediator can just sit back, relax. You don't have to take notes and just let them talk. And this is where I was so moved as a mediator because the teachers would lean in and look at their students and just be awesome. They would be caring. They would be generous. They would be understanding. They would say, wow, I didn't realize this or that. Let's try this. Let's try that. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And the students would be so touched by how much their teachers cared about them. The other thing is that students would be really surprised by how much their teachers even knew about them. Just things teachers observed about them in the class, who they worked well with. I don't think students really grasp how much teachers observe and care about them. But boy, I was so humbled because up until then in my career, it was always like, oh, come to the school psychologist for consulting and consultation, when really all I needed to do was create a safe structure and let these people solve their problems with their own creativity and heart. And I saw so much of this, and that really is what contributed to my enthusiasm about this process. Now, very rarely, but sometimes, the teacher might look at you stumped, like, I don't really know what to say at this moment. It's very rare, like I said, but here's some ideas. I'll let you look this over. But sometimes the teacher and student just kind of need to identify a system to communicate. Because again, it's individual for this teacher and this student. And, the other thing you realize is that no two students are the same. Some want to be touched. Some do not want to be touched. Some want a teacher to walk over and, kind of lean over their space. Other people don't want teachers in their space. Some want to get up and, get a Post-it note. Some want to hear their name. Some don't want to hear their name. So really, again, what works best for this teacher and this student? Where students sit in a class really matters because of the peer group around them and the classmates. So when a teacher notices, okay, I see you work well with these students. What about here? What about this? It really is empowering for the student to be able to say, yeah, hey, could I, work by myself, or could I sit with John or Sue or whatever it is? They're coming up with a plan that works for them. And then lastly, they're just coming up with concrete next steps to continue the business of being a teacher and a student. So again, giving them the space to make their own plans is really helpful. I'll let you look this over. Now, at the very end, I kind of toyed with the idea of pulling out a piece of paper and writing a written contract, but it ended up not always being kind of the thing people wanted to do at that moment. And maybe the 50 minutes was up, the bell rang, whatever, they needed to get to class. So I ended up instead doing a follow-up email, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. You're going to conclude the meeting with thanks and praise. Thank you both so much for being here today. The communication was honest and respectful. It seems like you have a good plan to move forward. Great work. Let me know if you'd like to meet again. I'm always happy to help. So, challenges. This is rare because most of them are really, really easy and wonderful. But sometimes it's okay to stop the mediation if you feel like a student is getting vulnerable. If a student's getting emotional, it's perfectly okay to say, you know what, why don't we stop the mediation, and would you like to speak with me personally, or maybe the school counselor, or whatever it is. It's okay to stop the mediation anytime. 2 times this happened where a student had agreed to be in the mediation, but the bridges had been burned, so to speak, and the student just said, I don't like the teacher and I never will. And it's like, oh my gosh. It's a tough situation, and but it really doesn't happen very often. But it's important to create a safe environment for both parties. And usually, like I said, people won't come to a mediation unless they're willing to be open to one another. There's lots and lots of pleasant surprises in mediation. And I think the one that really affected me the most was especially hearing a teacher admit, honestly, mistakes and vulnerabilities. I'll just read the first one out loud. You're right. I did get mad at you when Jamal was doing the same thing. It was unfair. When I think back, I think it was because Jamal was also respectful and funny, and that made me treat him a little different. But that was wrong, and I apologized for it. Well, the first time I heard a teacher do this, the student and I just looked at each other and we were just like, whoa, did that just happen? That was awesome. And like I said, that's such a big social skill of personal reflection. And the student was so moved. And as you can imagine, the student and the teacher, got along so great after that because the student was treated with so much dignity. Or sometimes the teacher might just be going through something and they say, I wasn't at my best. Or many times students will apologize because they know they were wrong. They know the difference between right and wrong, but these mediations give them a chance to express regret and remorse and an apology. And it really, you see it also absolves them of guilt and sometimes even shame. There's also some of the most fun mediations were just the goofiest because there had been a misread situation that was so easily cleared up that I had to buy this little toy and invite people to press it after an easy mediation.
That was easy.
Because you think, oh my gosh, if we hadn't had this mediation, these people would have been operating in this compromised way for the entire school year. And this was like too friggin' easy. And then lastly, another pleasant surprise is just when a student gently guides a teacher toward better teaching. Sometimes they say things like, well, I know students like it when we do hands-on activities, or maybe they even talk about tones of voices or things like that, or jokes or things that just don't make them feel really good. And teachers really hear it when it comes from a student. So the data. Let's talk about data. So I'm going to show 3 years of data. I'll probably go through these slides pretty quickly, but you can always go back later in the archive version of this webinar to look more closely. But this also is just to show you that introducing mediation in a big, busy high school is manageable. The first year, I did 38. Of those 38 mediations, 84% of the students had no further discipline referrals from the teacher. You can see just looking at how many were in a month, it was pretty manageable. The majority of referrals came from the administrators, and this would be because maybe the student had crossed paths with that administrator because of a disciplinary action. But I can tell you that administrators loved being able to discuss mediation with the student, with the parent, with the teacher, saying, hey, would you like to give this a try? Parents were so relieved that there was a positive approach to solving, these issues rather than just keeping the student from the classroom for a period of time. The vast majority of students the first year who participated were freshmen. The vast majority, well, not vast, but the majority were male. And the majority of students were African American, and this is why I really promote mediation as a way to help bridge understandings across racial, cultural, ethnic lines. And most of the teachers in the school were white. And this demographic is pretty similar to a lot of schools across the country where teachers maybe have a different background than the students are teaching. Year 2, pretty much the same in terms of numbers of mediations and similar response levels. Again, the vast majority of referrals came through administrators. Here we see a little more split between freshman and sophomore because it so happened that dean of students of sophomores was utilizing this more. But you can see that definitely this loads with the younger students. Male and female, slightly more males. Majority African American students participated. And mostly white teachers. By year 3, we see that it's really taken hold in the culture. It's been a big jump up in the total number of mediations, and this trend continued for years after. Again, similar referral sources. Similar age group, very much with the younger classmen. More males, more African American students, and white teachers. So this kind of gives you a year-to-year comparison, and you can kind of see the leaps up there of the numbers and the total numbers, the peak months, the grades of students, more freshmen, the gender of students, more males, more African American students participating in mediation, and the yearly number of mediations with effective outcomes. So in year 2 of doing this, as part of our tier 2 team meeting, we thought, okay, maybe it's time to really survey teachers and see what they think about it. I was a little nervous because we were doing an anonymous survey. We used SurveyMonkey, but it was helpful. So we sent it out to all the teachers who participated in the mediation, and 25 responded. You could see that many people had done one, but quite a few had done more than one mediation. This slide asks who initiated your mediation, and I was surprised to see that 40% of the teachers thought that they had initiated it, and I was actually pleased because, as you recall from the previous slides, most of the mediation referrals came from administrators. So what this suggests is that the administrator had a good conversation with the teacher, and they collaborated on whether or not having a mediation would be an effective idea. And so the teachers really felt ownership of that idea, and I think that's the best way to handle it in a very collaborative way. This asks how many years of teaching experience do you have, and surprisingly, a lot of veteran teachers really utilized the mediation. This question asks if people were enthusiastic and eager to participate in mediation. It was a slightly tongue-in-cheek question because I assumed that people would not necessarily be enthusiastic and eager, but lo and behold, over 70% of people said they were. This asks if the teacher learned things about the student's perspective that they had not previously known. And I think a lot of teachers do know their students, but 62.5% said they did learn something they had not previously known. And this question asks if students learned things about their perspectives that the student didn't previously know, and 71% thought they did. Um, 72% said they would recommend teacher-student mediation to other teachers. And lastly, and this of course is my favorite slide, 87% of the teachers said that they felt that the addition of teacher-student mediation at Centennial was a positive step toward improving student behavior and learning. We had a comment section, and we read these comments carefully. This is just a sampling of some of them. One has to do with timing. When do these meetings happen? Well, in a busy high school, we met during the school day, during lunch, during the teacher's lunch, the teacher's hallway supervision, or the teacher's prep period. Scheduling the mediation, you had to work with the teacher's schedule and their timing and be very polite and do it when they're available, and also the student's schedule so they don't miss a test or something. Mostly they would be hopefully scheduled within 3 days, sometimes 4, sometimes 5, but hopefully between 1 to 3 days. Some said, well, it doesn't resolve root conflicts, just makes others aware, so conflict might still be there, but dormant. And that's, I'm sure, true, because one meeting isn't going to solve all the root conflicts. But I kind of think about marriage counseling, when you go to marriage counseling and say, okay, one person's a slob and one person's a neat freak. And, one marriage counseling session isn't going to change all that, but it might make people more aware, so they're showing effort towards some compromise or some new ideas. It's not going to solve it, but effort matters. And so it does, kind of fall back to the two participants to just kind of keep communicating with the tools they obtained in that mediation. And that has also to do with the impact being more long-term. But it is not the end-all be-all, that's for sure. And a lot of other ideas are also important in schools to help teacher-student relationships. This has to do with follow-up and student input. We did definitely add a follow-up piece after getting this survey, which I'll go over in a minute, which was a follow-up email. I find the last bullet interesting because it kind of reminds me of the things that we hear a lot when we're talking about students with special needs, is like, well, I hope that student doesn't think that the rules are going to change for them. And I want to make it clear that mediation isn't about changing the rules for anybody. It's not about lowering expectation. What it's about is supporting students so they can meet expectations, and supporting students so they can work with the rules. Okay. It's about showing sensitivity and support for all students. Here's some of the strengths the teachers remarked on. I think that top one is kind of the gold standard. I love that comment. Because it shows an openness, I learned something about how to work better with this student. I learned some things that I was doing that weren't working with this student. So that's so nice when someone's open for that. And then just, people appreciating the opportunity to communicate. Here's some more. I think a lot of teachers recognize that it's a great opportunity for the student to feel like they get a voice. And also, I think teachers appreciated that it was away from the classroom environment or even the hallway. So many times teachers and students have those little hallway chats, and there's so many distractions, and it's not private. And so this was really a private space. So this is an example of what we did after getting the feedback. After the mediation, I would send an email to the teacher and ask them to print it for the student, where I would just simply list the agreements they came up with. I would not give a blow-by-blow description of, everything that was discussed in the email, but just say, hey, here's the plan you developed, great work. I'd list the things. And then at the end, I'd say, please let me know if you'd like to debrief or have a future mediation, or if you want me to check back in with you regularly, things like that. So in 2014, I had a student intern working with me. So she did a little survey and surveyed 14 students about what they thought about their mediations. And 100% of the students said that they got to say what they needed to say. They felt they were understood. They felt they were treated with respect, and they learned more things about the teacher's feelings and thoughts. They all felt the teachers learned more about their feelings and thoughts. These were some of their comments of what they felt before going into the mediation. I'll let you look it over. And then some of the comments after the mediation. And the idea that the mediation would help them and the teacher. There's a great relief that comes after these meetings. So the bottom line is that students really like them. They really felt they were treated with dignity and respect, and they were heard, and they learned stuff. So in the big picture, were Centennial's high school multi-tiered systems of support effective? The answer is yes. Did teacher-student mediation play a role in this success? The answer is yes. This is a kind of a rendition of what the tiered systems of support looked like when things were really humming, both academic and social emotional. Again, when you're working in tiered systems of support, these things can change based on your data. So this is kind of a snapshot. And I know it's hard to read, but just to kind of give you an overview. But this is a slide that came from the school about what discipline looked like over a period of time. And again, it's a little bit hard to read, but the last 2 years on it are correspond with the first 2 years of mediation. And you see that discipline referrals really dropped across demographic groups. And it was really a great way to validate what we were trying to do. So discipline referrals dropped, and here's a slide about suspensions. And again, we just saw some really nice drops across demographic lines that told us that we were on the right track. So there's always future needs. You know, my goal, my passion in life is that every school across America conduct restorative teacher-student mediations, mediate with students, mediate between adults. Good God, you know, there's so many conflicts between adults and schools that can be easily cleared up with one meeting, but people avoid these meetings. So I really think there's a place for adult mediations in schools as well, between faculty members, between staff and administrators, between parents and teachers, you name it. I talk about that in the book. I have a whole chapter on it. I myself participated in a couple of adult mediations for myself that were really helpful. I want to, encourage people to use, collect and analyze data so they can more, effectively personalize their interventions in their school. And then also make sure we're communicating with parents, staff, and students and following up where appropriate. So, I'm not going to show this video because there's no time. This is actually a video that demonstrates a full teacher-student mediation. And also a mediation between two students. It's on YouTube. If you don't have a chance to copy this link, if you Google my name and YouTube, it'll come up. My name is Ondine Gross, YouTube, and it'll come up. It's 42 minutes long. So now I'm super excited to hear from you all. I want to invite you to contact me. I put my email up there. I have a website. I would love to come to meet with you personally. I give workshops. I come visit school districts. I give workshops, whatever. I'm actually retired as of May 2017, so I'm free and would love to meet you. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions now.
Great job, Ondine. Wonderful. We do have some questions, so let's go ahead and just jump right in.
Okay.
There were a couple of questions, so this is kind of two-part.
Okay.
A lot of people were discussing and asking questions about the appropriate age or grade level for the teacher-student mediation. So what's your take on that, and do you feel that it's more effective at the high school level?
Well, I think that again, it's such a funny thing because it really depends on each, sort of the climate and the culture of each school. I think that it's a no-brainer that it is just perfectly catered for high school age, because I think teenagers are really in that phase of life where they want to be shown, respect. And that's where a lot of times that there is, these really, a lot of misread situations and sensitivities about all kinds of things, and that we're really honing in on teaching those communication skills. So I think it's a perfect fit for high school. Middle schools, I think it depends on the environment. In Champaign, there's 3 middle schools. One middle school, boom, started doing them. They do them all the time. They do tons, hundreds of them. The other 2 middle schools, like sometimes they do them, sometimes they don't. So it really just depends on the school climate. And I think elementary is really, again, going to be based on the school. I devote a lot of time in the book to speaking to elementary issues, because I wanted to make sure the book was inclusive of K through 12. So there's some modifications that you think about doing, but I think it's really important to just have a mechanism to address, building relationships, improving relationships, and addressing conflicts as they arise.
Okay, wonderful. So next question, are parents ever involved in the mediation, especially when it comes to young children?
Yes, I think that it's really important for parents to give permission for their children to participate. And it's also important for parents to, be a part of it, but as an observer. Once, the process is explained, and with young children, you might want to, debrief and do some interviews beforehand, and also use it as a teaching tool to expose them to more of a, vocabulary about feelings, words, and things like that. But the actual process of mediation, when parents do come, I ask them to observe. And then at the very end, after the sort of arc of the mediation has completed itself, then to participate in, kind of debriefing or talking. But it's really important not to kind of complicate the actual process. So if parents want to be there, I make sure that it's okay with everybody involved, but ask them to be there as an observer until the mediation is over, and then, then speak. So.
Okay. So when you were going over the data and the information from the study, a couple of questions came up about how you define effective outcomes.
Yes. So keep in mind, we're not university people. We were just a school, and each school kind of comes up with their own kind of criteria as to how to count things, how to measure things. So what we thought of was, if a student has no further discipline referrals from that teacher for the remainder of the semester, that's considered an effective mediation. So that's what we mean.
Okay. It looks like we have 1 or 2 more questions. So if anybody has any other questions for Ondine, feel free to just put it into the question pane up there at the top of your control panel. This next one is, have you ever encountered administrators who were resistant to mediate between students and adults?
Well, each mediation is kind of approached on a case-by-case basis. I personally never had an administrator say to me, don't do a mediation with these 2 people. But, if an administrator had a valid reason for that, I would certainly want to hear and respect those reasons, So yeah, it's like I said, it's a voluntary meeting, and it really has to be something that everyone agrees is appropriate. When we're talking about mediating between students, that's another area where you really want to make sure that you're using this intervention appropriately with the right situations. So yeah, I never had that happen personally, because our administrators really loved it when our teachers participated. And also, when teachers are willing to be in a mediation, it shows an openness, and they would put that in their evaluation, because being a self-reflective teacher who's seeking new ways to understand and connect with students, that's a really good thing. So teachers would write about it in their evaluations, or, and be given kind of brownie points for being part of a mediation.
Okay. So it looks like we have 1 more question for you.
Okay.
How does a student go about requesting a mediation? Is there a system or anything that you would recommend to be in place?
What we did, first of all, we let all students know about mediation, because we would do some orientation activities at the beginning of the year, where we reviewed all the different resources we had, and we included mediation. But also we trained our counselors and social workers and everybody that if they, or even teachers, that if you ever hear a student say, my teacher hates me, that you broach the topic with them of like, hey, have you ever thought about having a mediation? What's that? Oh, it's really cool. It's this meeting, where you get to talk and listen. And so we would sell it anytime we heard a student say, my teacher hates me, or my teacher's unfair, or my teacher's racist, or something like that. We would definitely bring it up to a student and encourage their participation. So really how to do it would be like, just ask any adult. We really tried to keep the system simple. I would collect the data. I would enter the data in our Swiss system and so forth, but I wanted to keep it super simple and user friendly. Hey, shoot me an email. Hey, stop me in the hall and say, hey, someone's the one for mediation. Cool. I'll take it from there.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much. Great questions, everyone. If anyone has any questions as they're watching the recording or that come up later on this evening, just go ahead and send us them at Brooks Web Meeting at brookspublishing.com. You can also go onto our edWeb community and put your questions there in one of the discussion boards. I just want to remind everybody that Ondine's book, Restore the Respect, is on sale at Brooks Publishing. Just go to brookspublishing.com. You can use code edWebOG, and that's going to save you 20%, and that offer is good until December 31st. So thank you so much, Ondine. We really appreciate you being here today and presenting for us. You did a fantastic job.
It was a true pleasure. I noticed a lot of comments and questions popping up, but I couldn't read them in real time, so I'm really going to look forward to reading your comments and questions later. Thank you all so much for being with me today.
Yeah, and if for your CE certificate, don't forget about that. If you guys were registered and logged in with your email, it's going to be emailed to you within 24 hours. And if you joined us by phone or you're watching the archived recording of this webinar, you're just going to need to go take that CE quiz on the edweb.net Inclusive Education Community. And again, this is sponsored by Brooks Publishing, and we have a wonderful edWeb community teaching all students. Feel free to join. It's got great resources, online discussions, webinars. So yeah, please go ahead and join that. And Ondine, thank you again so much. Fantastic job today. And I want to thank everybody out there for joining, and please enjoy the rest of your day.